A thin veil of morning mist drifted above the Thames as London roused itself in the pale light of 1817, and in that quiet hour, before the carriages began their clatter and the shopkeepers their rituals, Lady Eleanor Harwood felt the weight of expectation settle upon her shoulders like an unwelcome shawl. She stood at her window in Bloomsbury, watching a milk cart rattle across the street, and tried to imagine the night ahead, the chandeliers, the swirling gowns, the subtle music of gossip and ambition. The first ball of the season was meant to mark her triumphal entry into society. Instead, her thoughts carried a tremor of dread. Her family's circumstances, once secure, even enviable, had thinned to shadows. Every servant in the household seemed to move with quiet knowledge, as though the very walls understood that the Harwoods could not endure another year of dwindling accounts. Eleanor's mother had said it plainly enough the night before. "My dear, you must find a husband of means. Not for vanity, never that, but for survival." Eleanor had nodded dutifully, though the heaviness in her chest refused to ease. She understood perfectly. It was not romance that pushed her toward the glittering halls of Mayfair, not the dream of courtship, nor any girlish fancy. It was necessity, stern, cold, and urgent. The reality of it made her feel older than the 21 years she carried. Still, she had resolved to conduct herself with dignity. Even desperation could be wrapped in grace. By evening, the Harwood carriage rolled toward Berkeley Square, its wheels gliding over the cobblestones as golden lanterns flickered along the street. Eleanor, dressed in a gown that had been cleverly altered to mimic a more current style, folded her gloved hands in her lap. She felt the faint quiver of nerves beneath her calm exterior, though she refused to let it show. As they approached the ballroom, she could hear the rising hum of conversation, laughter bright and brittle in the cool night air. Her mother leaned close and whispered encouragement, but the words drifted past her like a passing breeze. Eleanor had already begun constructing the poised mask she knew she must wear. Inside the ballroom, the brilliance was nearly blinding. Hundreds of candles danced in the crystal chandeliers, casting warm reflections across marble floors and silk-draped walls. Pastel gowns swept across the room like soft waves, while the gentlemen stood in tailored elegance, their expressions ranging from polite interest to practiced boredom. A string quartet played a lively country dance, its cheerful notes disguising the tension woven into every whispered exchange. Eleanor paused at the top of the stairs, gathering herself before descending. Though she was accustomed to observation, the scrutiny of the crowd tonight felt sharper, keener, as though a collective judgment hovered in the air. She could sense the murmurs even before she reached the floor, a slight shift in posture here, a ripple of lifted brows there, small, almost invisible indicators, but unmistakable to someone who had long watched society from its quieter edges. Her mother ushered her toward a cluster of acquaintances, and Eleanor summoned her politeness, her resilience, her willingness to be pleasant even when she felt unbearably exposed. For a few minutes, things proceeded smoothly enough. She exchanged polite greetings, offered courteous smiles, and listened attentively to trivial remarks. But the moment of embarrassment, swift and slicing, came just as she felt her tension beginning to ease. Two young women, dressed in the newest French silks and steeped in the unearned confidence of wealth, drifted past her with exaggerated delicacy. One leaned toward the other, making no effort to lower her voice. "Poor thing," she murmured, eyes flicking toward Eleanor's gown. "Imagine arriving in a dress from 2 seasons ago." The second girl hid a smirk behind her fan. "Her prospects must be dimmer than I thought." Eleanor felt the hot bloom of humiliation rise along her neck. She turned slightly, pretending interest in a nearby floral arrangement, but the sting had already settled. She had expected whispers, knew, in fact, that rumors of her family's difficulties had begun to circulate, but hearing the scorn aloud was something else entirely. Every instinct urged her to withdraw, to find some quiet corner where she could breathe without the pressure of judgment closing in on all sides. She did not get far before her next trial arrived. A young gentleman, a baronet's son who had previously shown mild interest, approached with a hesitant smile. Eleanor offered a graceful curtsy, relieved for the distraction, but relief quickly soured when his expression faltered. He stammered through a greeting, then abruptly excused himself, slipping away with the furtiveness of someone avoiding a trap. The reason became clear moments later when she overheard another whisper. "Her dowry is nearly gone, did you not hear?" The words struck deeper than she expected, and for a moment she simply stood there, frozen amid the swirl of dancers and laughter. She had feared exposure, now it had arrived in full. Her humiliation was complete, and the realization pressed against her heart with quiet force. She excused herself from her mother's side and retreated to a dim alcove near the tall windows, pretending to admire the garden while she steadied her breath. It was in that fragile moment, when she felt the sharpest sting of her vulnerability, that she sensed a presence behind her. Not a movement, not a sound, but something more subtle, the awareness of being observed. She turned her head slightly, and her gaze met a pair of dark, striking eyes across the room. The man who watched her stood beside a marble pillar, partially obscured by the shifting crowd. Yet, even from a distance, he exuded a certain gravity, an assuredness that set him apart from the glittering throng. His posture was impeccable, his attire severe in its elegance, and his expression unreadable. Eleanor could not look away, though something in his gaze unsettled her. She recognized him from painted likenesses and murmured discussions. Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Windermere, returned to England mere weeks ago after an extended absence abroad. Rumors claimed he had been involved in diplomatic affairs during the final years of the war, though no one seemed to know the truth. He was a figure wrapped in speculation and silence, a man whose reappearance had stirred curiosity across every drawing-room in London. And now he was looking at her, directly, intently, as though she were the only person in the room. Not with pity, nor idle interest. His gaze held something far sharper, something that made her pulse quicken in alarm rather than vanity. She forced herself to glance away, reminding herself that men of his rank did not concern themselves with women in her position. Whatever curiosity he displayed must have been purely accidental. Yet when she looked back, he was still watching, still studying her with that unervingly calm intensity. She felt exposed under it, as though he could see past her composure and into the turmoil she fought to hide. His attention was too precise, too knowing. She could not decide whether to feel flattered or warned. Before she could gather herself, a footman approached the Duke with a discreet silver tray. A folded note lay upon it, small and inconspicuous. The Duke took it without ceremony, flicked his eyes over its contents, and slipped it into his coat with a movement too fluid to be merely casual. His jaw tightened faintly, an almost imperceptible reaction, but enough to suggest the message was neither trivial nor expected. Then, without another glance at the crowd, he fastened his cloak and strode toward the exit. Eleanor watched him go, curious despite herself. She felt certain the note bore significance, yet she could not fathom its nature. What business required a man of such high rank to leave a celebrated ball in haste? What troubles followed him through London's most prestigious halls? As his dark silhouette disappeared into the night, a strange whisper echoed in her thoughts. Not a sound, but a quiet intuition she could not dismiss, that the Duke's gaze had lingered too long to be meaningless, and that whatever path he walked, it wound dangerously close to her own. She drew in a careful breath, steadying herself against the window's cool glass. She had come tonight expecting only to salvage her reputation, and perhaps catch the polite notice of a gentleman. Instead, she found humiliation, and the unsettling intrigue of a man whose life seemed carved from secrecy itself. A soft voice from behind called her name, recalling her to the present. She composed her expression, lifting her chin, but the echo of those dark eyes remained with her, quiet, persistent, and inexplicably foreboding. Though she did not yet know it, the night had already shifted her fate. The shame she endured would soon fade beneath a far more perilous entanglement, one woven by the very man who had watched her depart the ballroom with something that felt less like interest and more like recognition. The morning after the ball arrived with an unfamiliar heaviness, as though the very air carried traces of the previous evening's wounds. Eleanor moved through the Harwood home with quiet deliberation, determined not to let her humiliation shape the day. Yet every remembered whisper returned with sharp precision. She poured tea for her mother, responded gently to inquiries about the event, and pretended not to notice when her mother's hopeful glance faltered, just briefly, at the absence of promising news. Eleanor's disappointment lingered beneath her composure, but she knew better than to dwell on it aloud. The season was only beginning. She had resolved to continue with grace, even if her heart remained sore. By midday, she sought solitude in the small garden behind the house. The early spring air smelled of damp earth and hyacinths, grounding her more effectively than any polite conversation could. She sat on a weathered bench and allowed the quiet to settle around her. Yet peace refused to come. Her thoughts kept returning to the Duke of Windermere, his unwavering gaze, his abrupt departure, the mysterious note slipped to him with such discreet urgency. She had no reason to think of him further, and yet she did. Something about the man tugged at her mind, not with romantic intrigue, but with an unease she could neither name nor dismiss. Her contemplation broke when a servant approached with a small wrapped parcel. Eleanor accepted it with mild surprise. The package bore neither a crest nor a signature, only her name in elegant handwriting. Curious, she untied the string and unfolded the cloth. Inside lay a small silver compass, worn smooth by age. Its needle quivered faintly before settling with deliberate certainty. Engraved around its edge were Latin words she recognized from her studies. "Ca invenit verum septentrionum," for those who must find their true north. A chill touched her spine. The object felt too personal, too pointed in its symbolism to be a casual gift. Before she could speculate further, her mother appeared at the garden door, brandishing a card with bright astonishment. "Eleanor, the Duke of Windermere has sent an invitation. A private gathering this afternoon. He requests your attendance." Her mother's voice trembled with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Eleanor took the card, her pulse tightening. The script was undeniably masculine, refined, and precise. The invitation was brief, offering no explanation, merely a time, a location, and the simple expectation of her presence. The coincidence of the compass and the invitation unsettled her. And yet declining would be unthinkable. Refusing a duke, especially one of his influence, could jeopardize more than reputation. Carriage wheels echoed along the stone drive as Eleanor later approached the duke's townhouse in Grosvenor Square. The neighborhood itself bore an air of restrained grandeur, elegant facades, orderly hedges, and windows filled with soft lamplight. She stepped out with careful poise, though her heartbeat betrayed her calm exterior. The footman ushered her into a foyer of muted elegance, dark polished floors, portraits with solemn eyes, and a hush that seemed deliberate. The house felt like a place designed to contain secrets rather than display wealth. A servant guided her through a hallway into a sun-filled garden room. Rose vines climbed the walls, and the afternoon light cast warm gold over the floor. Adrian Blackthorne stood near a table set with tea, his posture composed, his gaze unreadable. He bowed with formality, yet the gesture held the quiet gravity of someone who seldom offered deference. Eleanor curtsied, acutely aware of the rarity of such a private audience. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice low and steady, "I appreciate your prompt acceptance. I trust the invitation did not cause undue concern." "It surprised me, Your Grace," she replied carefully. "But I assumed you would not summon me without purpose." A faint curve touched his mouth, something between acknowledgment and amusement. "You assume correctly." He gestured for her to sit, and she obliged, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The silence that followed was not awkward but charged, as though each waited to observe the other more fully before speaking further. Adrian studied her with the same unsettling precision she had noticed at the ball. It felt like a scrutiny rooted not in vanity but in assessment, as though he sought to determine what kind of person she truly was beneath the societal veneer. "I have been told," he said at last, "that you possess an uncommon eye for subtlety. You see what others overlook." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. "I do not know who told you such a thing," she answered slowly, "but I cannot say I am extraordinary in any way." "That is not how the world appears to me," he replied. "Some individuals wear their nature like a visible crest. Others conceal their depth until circumstance reveals it. His words lingered, leaving her uncertain whether he spoke in compliment or warning. When she attempted to redirect the conversation, he shifted it again with quiet persistence. Their exchange felt like a dance conducted without music, steady, measured, and threaded with tension. At last, she gathered the courage to ask the question pressing on her mind. "Your Grace," she said, "may I ask why you invited me here?" He held her gaze for a long moment, the sunlight reflecting faintly in his dark eyes. "Because," he said, "some things cannot be understood from a distance. Some must be studied at close range." Her breath caught, though she disguised the reaction with practiced poise. His voice carried no flirtation. She sensed no attempt at charm. The remark was a statement of fact, offered with disarming frankness. It unsettled her more than any compliment could. She opened her mouth to speak, but footsteps interrupted her. A footman approached and quietly announced that the Duke's evening schedule required his attention. Adrian dismissed the servant with a nod, then turned back to Eleanor. "Forgive the abrupt interruption," he said. "I will not keep you longer. But before you depart, did you receive the item sent to you this morning?" She hesitated, realizing the compass must indeed be from him. "I did," she answered carefully. "It is an unusual gift." "It is a reminder," he said, "that one's path is not always found where society expects it." His tone carried a weight she could not decipher. Before she could inquire further, he bowed once more. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I trust you will find clarity in due time." The carriage ride home passed in bewildered silence. Her mother greeted her eagerly, but Eleanor offered only the barest details, choosing to keep the conversation private until she understood it herself. Yet clarity did not come. Instead, confusion deepened, particularly when she learned that a small mishap with a Harwood carriage earlier had left her briefly unchaperoned outside the townhouse. The incident was minor, but in the ruthless arena of society gossip, it was enough to ignite speculation. By evening, whispers had already begun circulating. Eleanor heard her name spoken with pity in some circles and sharp curiosity in others. The next day, as she stepped into Hatchard's bookshop, seeking refuge among leather-bound volumes, she felt the shift in atmosphere. Conversations faltered when she passed. Two matrons exchanged knowing glances. A young woman murmured something behind her fan. The implication was unmistakable. Eleanor Harwood had met the Duke privately. And given her family's dwindling circumstances, the interpretation was neither kind nor charitable. She forced herself to continue browsing, ignoring the heat rising in her cheeks. Yet when she stepped back into the street, she noticed a figure lingering across the road. A man in a dark overcoat stood half-shadowed, pretending to examine a lamppost. His gaze flicked toward her, then away. She walked on, the sensation of being observed prickling along her spine. When she glanced back again, he was gone, vanished with unnerving ease. That night, unable to sleep, she sat at her writing desk with the compass beside her, its needle quivering faintly in the lamplight. She traced the engraved words with her fingertip and wondered what truth they sought to convey. What did the Duke expect her to find? Why choose her, of all women in London, to draw into his orbit? Her thoughts turned restlessly until the house fell silent. And yet, in the quiet darkness, she sensed the answer lay not in romance but in danger. Whatever world the Duke inhabited, it cast long shadows, and she felt herself inching toward the edge of them. Still, she could not deny a growing pull of curiosity, sharper now than fear. Something had begun, something she did not yet understand. And though she ought to retreat, her heart refused to turn away, as if drawn toward its own uncertain north. The winter air pressed sharply against the windows of Windermere House as Eleanor stepped onto the wide stone terrace, her breath forming pale clouds that mingled with the faint scent of smoldering firewood. She had not been summoned lightly. The Duke's message had arrived with a precision that left no room for doubt, commanding her presence in a manner that was at once formal and imperious. The house itself reflected his character, immense yet contained, rich with opulence restrained by an unspoken discipline. Each portrait, each polished surface, spoke of a lineage of power tempered by intellect, and Eleanor felt, for the first time, the true weight of the world into which she had been drawn. Inside, the Duke awaited her in the library, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, the spines gilded and solemn. The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the walls, and for a moment, Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, absorbing the atmosphere of deliberate control. He rose at her entrance, bowing with a formality that was never mere gesture. Each movement bespoke authority, and yet there was a careful reserve, a subtle invitation that demanded observation rather than compliance. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth, almost measured, yet carrying an undercurrent she could not identify. "You honor me with your presence." His eyes, dark and sharp, followed her as she closed the door behind her and approached the chair he had indicated. "I trust your journey here was comfortable?" "It was," she replied, though the truth was secondary to her composure. "Your instructions were clear, and I am punctual, as requested." She seated herself, hands folded in her lap, and met his gaze without faltering. Even now, the gravity of her position made her pulse quicken. Every word, every pause, could be observed, weighed, and interpreted. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both her civility and her awareness of the unspoken rules. "You have received the compass?" he asked, gesturing toward the small silver object she had kept with her since its delivery. "I have," Eleanor said. "It is remarkable, though I confess, its meaning eludes me." The Duke's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile, as though pleased with her honesty. "It is intended as a guide, in more ways than one. Some paths cannot be discerned from a distance, Lady Eleanor. One must navigate them personally, observing the currents and shifts that the careless eye overlooks." His tone implied an authority born not merely of rank, but of intimate knowledge, of experiences that had rendered him both vigilant and formidable. Eleanor's mind turned cautiously, aware that his words were layered, each syllable a careful calculation. "And you believe that I may see what others do not?" she asked, curiosity tempered with restraint. "Indeed," he replied, his voice firm yet patient. "You possess qualities the world underestimates: attentiveness, clarity, and the courage to confront realities that others evade. It is precisely why I requested this meeting." He paused, and for the first time, his expression softened, revealing a depth beneath the rigid exterior. "There is danger afoot, Lady Eleanor, subtle, insidious. I cannot fully reveal its nature, yet it is intertwined with matters that touch the very fabric of our society. I need an ally who observes keenly, who acts without being seen." The weight of his words pressed against her, sharp and immediate. Danger, in her mind, was not an abstraction. It was a tangible threat, one that could unsettle her family, her reputation, even her life. And yet, beneath the apprehension, an ember of intrigue glimmered, compelling her to remain. Her own instincts, long honed by years of navigating society's subtle cruelties, told her that she could not withdraw without consequence. To step back would be to abandon a role she had been drawn into before even knowing its scope. "I am honored that you think so highly of me," she said cautiously. "Yet I must admit, I am unprepared for matters of danger or political intrigue. My understanding is limited to the parlors and drawing-rooms of London, not the hidden currents of power." He leaned forward, resting one hand lightly on the edge of the table, his gaze unwavering. "Preparation is a matter of observation and courage, not experience alone. And courage, Lady Eleanor, is a quality you have already demonstrated, in ways both subtle and profound. Do not underestimate your own capacity, nor the significance of your choices." His words, measured yet potent, left her in quiet contemplation. The gravity of the situation became evident. She was no longer merely a social debutante. She was a participant in a game whose rules were veiled, yet whose consequences were unmistakable. Their conversation continued, each phrase weighted with intent, a careful negotiation of trust and caution. Eleanor learned that the Duke had been entangled in matters beyond ordinary comprehension, diplomatic entanglements whose exposure could unravel reputations and destabilize factions within Parliament. Yet he had chosen to confide, partially, in her presence. Not in trust born of affection, but in recognition of her discernment, her ability to navigate subtlety without succumbing to fear or pretense. As the afternoon waned, a sudden disturbance arrived at the outer gates, a shadowed figure attempting to intercept her departure. The household staff acted swiftly, but the tension was immediate, palpable. The Duke moved with swift decisiveness, confronting the intruder with a presence that left no room for resistance. Eleanor, observing, realized the truth she had long suspected but never named. Proximity to him was not a matter of mere social elevation, it entailed peril. Yet she did not retreat. The fear, though present, was tempered by a fascination she could not fully articulate. The man before her was formidable, commanding, and yet not without restraint. His strength did not intimidate entirely. It compelled attention, demanded acknowledgement. Once the threat was subdued, they returned to the library, and for the first time, the Duke spoke with an unguarded sincerity that unsettled Eleanor's composure. "You see now that your presence is not without consequence. The world into which you have stepped is neither gentle nor forgiving. And yet, I would not have you fear it so completely as to withdraw. Your courage and insight are invaluable." Eleanor's response was measured, her voice soft yet unwavering. "I did not choose this path, Your Grace, yet I see now that retreat would be neither prudent nor honest. If my presence can serve a purpose beyond mere propriety, then I shall remain." A faint nod passed between them, carrying the weight of mutual acknowledgement. They were aligned not in sentiment, but in understanding. The danger that surrounded them was real, but so too was a connection forged in necessity and observation. She began to perceive that her own agency, her intellect, her discretion, her capacity to act, was her greatest resource in this unfolding dynamic. And the Duke, for all his authority, required her presence not only for practicality, but for the clarity only she could bring. As evening descended, bringing with it the muted glow of lamps through tall windows, Eleanor felt a subtle shift within herself. Fear remained, yet it no longer paralyzed her. Instead, it honed her attention, sharpened her awareness. The Duke's calculated seriousness, coupled with glimpses of unspoken concern, impressed upon her the singularity of her position. She was both observer and participant, a catalyst within a narrative larger than the ballroom intrigues of London society. Before she departed, Adrian spoke once more, his tone now softened by the gravity of shared understanding. "Lady Eleanor, you may find that the compass is not merely an object but a reminder. Some paths are discovered only by those willing to step into uncertainty. Consider this an invitation, not to folly, but to vigilance." The words lingered in the library long after she had left, echoing in her mind as she descended the stairs to the waiting carriage. The streets of London were cloaked in shadow as she traveled home, each lamp casting halos upon the cobblestones. Eleanor remained silent, her thoughts a careful orchestration of analysis and reflection. The compass, the Duke's invitation, the shadowed figure outside the gates. All pieces of a puzzle whose dimensions she had yet to grasp fully. Yet one certainty crystallized: her life had irrevocably changed. What had begun as a season of social expectation had become an entanglement of intrigue, observation, and emerging responsibility. That night, as she wrote in her journal, Eleanor reflected upon the unexpected depth of the Duke's influence. She noted not only the events themselves, but the subtle dynamics, the way he measured her reactions, the deliberate timing of each gesture, the quiet insistence that she comprehend her own capacity to act. In these reflections, she understood that attraction, if it existed, was secondary to the careful choreography of survival, insight, and necessity. Yet, despite her disciplined caution, a spark of curiosity, quiet, insistent, almost imperceptible, took root. In the final hour, Eleanor placed the silver compass beside her pen. Its needle shimmered faintly in the lamplight, unwavering in direction. She allowed herself a brief acknowledgement of its symbolism: guidance, discovery, courage. And she recognized the larger truth unfolding around her. The Duke's selection of her was no mere accident, no trivial whim of fortune. It was a deliberate choice, calculated and precise, meant to draw her into a world she could neither foresee nor escape. As she closed her journal, a sense of anticipation mingled with her unease. The danger remained, as it always would, but so too did the possibility of agency, of understanding, of influence. Eleanor was no longer a passive observer of society's machinations, she had been called to act within them. And in that calling lay both peril and promise, a duality she could neither reject nor fully embrace. The night passed, and dawn approached once more, pale and still over London's rooftops. Eleanor lay awake, eyes tracing the shadows along her ceiling, mind alert to every sound. Somewhere, the Duke's presence lingered in thought and consequence, invisible yet undeniable. She understood, with a clarity that only heightened awareness brings, that their fates were entwined, not in ease, not in casual courtship, but in a dangerous game whose rules were yet to reveal themselves. And as the first light of day touched the city, Eleanor felt the quiet conviction that she would not withdraw. The path before her, uncertain and treacherous, would be navigated with care, courage, and the inexorable attention that had already drawn the Duke's interest. The game had begun, and she would play, guided by the compass in her hand and the unyielding determination in her heart.